Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to review the Royal Enfield Classic 350, one of the most beautiful bikes in production today. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment below if there's a particular bike you would like to see me do a design review on. There's a term called the cost fallacy, where people think if they spend lots of money on things, it's really good. But this is a fantastic example of where really good design and really good value come together to make something that's beautiful. And really good design should be available to everyone. It shouldn't be exclusive or expensive. One of the wonderful things about motorcycle production is that in a world where everyone's always going for the newest, latest thing, this is a unusual industry in that you can choose to buy bikes themed on different eras. So most manufacturers will have bikes that look like they're from the 60s, the 50s, the 70s, the 80s. You can actually pick an era of bike that you love, and could you imagine how good cars would be if they could do this? They've got far too many regulations and things like that, so they're not allowed to do this. But it's the equivalent of being able to go into a Ford dealership and buy like a 60s Mustang. It's absolutely awesome, and it's one of the things I dearly love about bikes that you don't get with other things. This bike is a great example of that. You've got a fantastic bit of 1950s, 1960s design. It's very cheap. It's still made out of metal and things like that. They haven't embraced a lot of new materials, and the only real tech on it are things like ABS that they have to legally have. So the Classic 350 began production in around 2009, and we've had it since then, and all we've really been getting is minor tweaks and improvements as it went. It's based on the Bullet G2 360 from just after World War II, so it's essentially a 1950s design. There's currently 3 million of these in the world, so it shows you how much people love retro design. There's other manufacturers rely on this as well. Triumph do a bunch of retro bikes, Harley do a bunch of retro bikes. I think it's because when you buy a motorcycle, you buy it with love versus a car where you're tend to buying something more practical these days. Cars used to have this passion, but now essentially they're just washing machines and vacuum cleaners. It's a device to get you from A to B with an iPhone in it. So because Royal Enfield in England went bust, they'd built a factory in India to supply the Indian military with them. And as a result, it existed in a bubble. It kind of skipped the 80s, skipped the 70s, and retained its design. Because of this, it became a sort of cultural icon in India. And they kept making them right up until EICMA Motors bought them out. It's very rare you get this sort of timeless design. The Coke bottle's a good example, the Zippo lighter, an angle pose lamp. Sometimes there's just a classic piece of design and it just stays like that forever. Had they embraced the 80s or the 70s, this bike might have long been forgotten, but because of its popularity, it's actively encouraged other companies such as Honda to make their own small retro bikes as well. So let's look at the design of it. It very much harks back to the 1950s. It's got elements of those smooth, organic shapes. Before they really understand aerodynamics, they used to build these really smooth organic shapes into bikes to help airflow, and by proxy of this, it just ended up looking really beautiful. A great example of this is the E-Type Jaguar, which was actually designed for maximum aero at the time, and they just so happened to make something that was absolutely gorgeous. Let's just start by looking at the lines, how simple they are, how lack of faff there is in there. It's very, very simple lines, and it also incorporates that classic triangular frame that the Royal Enfields pretty much all have. The absolute key to this bike is simplicity. There's no obvious tech, there's nothing there that shouldn't be there. It's as stripped back and simple as possible. You can see this in the basic shapes of the bike. Very simple, well proportioned, well laid out, beautiful shapes. There's a whole load of negative space, which I've talked about in my other video, which is a space not occupied by something. And that's just as important as the space that is occupied and given an overall sense of shape and proportion. I'm a big fan of negative space on a bike because it makes it look lighter and airier. When you can see through it, you can see the engine, which is the heart of the bike. It has a generally lighter feel than something where there's no gaps and everything's packed in. Part of the retro feel is because you can't see any tech, everything is mechanical. It's all bolts, chains, metal panels. It looks like a vintage machine. There's nothing to throw you off. There's no like computers or anything like that, or you're not seeing any cables. They've done a great job at hiding all the cables, which is astonishing on a cheap bike. And any modern tech that's been brought into it is very well hidden and tastefully done. So the new ones have an LED light, which of course is better and more useful than a bulb light. They have ABS, which is safer, and it's a legal requirement, but it's well hidden. There's nothing obviously on it that tells you it's brand new, and this is what confuses a lot of normal people when they see it. They look at it and they think you've restored it yourself, and it's like, oh no, I just drove it out the showroom this morning. I can't think of many products that actually do that, and to do it as well as this is something outstanding. It looks good in photos, but it's one of those bikes that in real life it is really stunning. It's a real eye catcher. People will always stop and talk to you if you're riding one. One of the interesting things I've noticed as well is I think people have a connection to mechanical machines. I think there's something deep inside us that loves something mechanical. This is why people still love steam trains. They love old steam tractors. They love any sort of vintage car. It's that kind of mechanical, steel-oiled machinery that's been around for well over 100 years that we seem to have a connection with. They seem to have a soul and life to themselves that something that's got a battery in it just doesn't have. One of the things you can sense from this is it was designed with a pencil. So older vehicles were always drawn by pencil first, and they still are to this day. Obviously, for the purposes of modern manufacturing, they will run it through a CAD system. But you can tell from like the slight curve under the tank, the simplicity of the lines, the beautiful soft curves and shapes that are held within it. There's definitely been beautiful pencil drawings at the start, and that always carries through a design. If you just start designing on the computer straight away, it removes that organic flow that you tend to get if you start with pencil drawings. As I've talked about before, the exhaust on this is beautifully simple. It's so just a couple of curves, a little can on the end. They've done really well to hide the cat. Obviously, because it's just a little bike, they don't need a huge amount of emissions control. But there's no wires, there's no cables, there's no boxes, there's no huge bin on the back of it. It's a beautifully put together exhaust, and this is a big part of the beauty. Just look at how simple the lines are on the exhaust. Things can be beautiful the more simple and more drawn back they actually are. One of the areas I think Royal Enfield does better than anyone else is the colours they pick for their bikes. They're usually always in a range of colours. I think they have a hand-done line work on the tanks as well, but the Classic 350 has some absolutely stunning colours. They've picked bold, exciting colours, but also at the same time they hark back to vintage colours. So one of the things you might not know is the technology for colours has evolved along with the engineering of things. So one of the reasons old vehicles, old bikes tend to lean into particular colours is because that was the only dyes they had at the time for the paints. In modern times, you can have any colour you want on anything, and I don't think people really noticed how colour technology has changed over the years. A lot of manufacturers just seem to go, right, we'll do a red, a blue and a black one and that's it. Or we'll just have our one colour and we'll put accents on it. Whereas this one here is Madras red, but there's the Signals, which is an army themed one. There's that beautiful old blue one. And on that, the Goan Classic as well, they've showed some new colours for that. And there's just so much vibrant, bright, exciting and retro colours available. This goes a long way to carrying a bike. As you know, a lot of people do repaint their bike because the original manufacturer colours are just so dull. So I'm going to pick out a few chef's kiss moments on this. Absolutely beautiful little features that just really make the whole bike. Let's start with the nacelle that holds the instruments and the light. This is a wonderful piece of old 1950s design. Obviously, it was originally on the older bikes for the purposes of aero, but we understand it's not really going to make much difference compared to our understanding of aero now. But as an organic form, to enclose all of that stuff that clutters up the handlebars, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's a really beautiful piece of design. On this, it would have been designed in CAD and built properly based on the old one, but you know, in the original, they'd probably used a carving out of wood or similar to get the shape and then beat metal over the top of it to build the prototypes. The headlight at the front with the little visor to help direct the beam is just gorgeous as well. That's classic 1950s. You see it on all the old cars and everything. Yeah, again, modern technology. We've got LEDs and everything now, but it's such a beautiful thing. It really is, just adds so much to what could just be a headlight. The long mud guards. It's a long fashion for us to have really short, tiny or invisible mud guards, because people always see big, long, extensive mud guards as an old-fashioned thing, whereas here it's just really embraced it. And when done properly with the right proportion, it just looks stunning. It makes the bike look so vintage, but so beautiful and practical at the same time. As I mentioned before, the switch gear on a Royal Enfield emulates the switches on artillery pieces, which built like a gun as part of their whole branding. Not only does the switch gear work really well, it's often got metal switches on it too, which just makes such a difference to the tactile feel of something. Something feels more quality and retro if it's got big clunky buttons, and it really does that here. One of the first things I would do if I had the bike is I would remove the back seat. It's only a little bike, you're not going to go pillying a lot on it, but the way it accentuates the arch of the rear wheel mudguard, the way it creates a bit of negative space, the way it accentuates the saddle sticking out, that makes it look even more retro, even more 1950s. So I just take the back seat off. It's absolutely stunning without it. It makes a beautiful bike even more beautiful without it. Again, it's that rule of simplicity. Less is more. Having less and simple shapes and clean lines just makes something more beautiful than it is. As I've mentioned on other bikes as well, both sides of this bike are beautiful. Now, I know it's a very simple engine with one exhaust and there's not a lot going on here, but they haven't forgotten the negative side of the bike. They haven't just ignored it. It's just as beautiful. It just doesn't have the exhaust. Absolutely stunning. So you can look at it from any angle and enjoy it in all ways. There's no bits of it that make you cringe when you look at it. Every single angle is just stunning. All over the bike, wires, cables, plastics, they're all hidden, they're all tucked away. What you actually visually get to see is focused entirely on colour, big bold shapes, soft curves and beautiful retro pieces. You could put this in an antique shop and people would think it was a vintage bike that didn't know better, and the fact it's being made right now is just absolutely amazing. I love that so much about bikes. Just look at the rear cluster. It's absolutely exquisite. It's so perfectly proportioned, perfectly laid out, little chrome touches on it just to lift it. Yeah, inside you'll know it'll be like a brand new LED light that will function perfectly, but to put that effort into the lines of it so it just sweeps off the back of the bike is just gorgeous. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this review. I really do think this is an absolutely beautiful bike and I do intend on getting one at one point. Its beauty lies in its simplicity. It doesn't need a lot of chrome. It doesn't need a lot of showy, flashy parts or clever ways of doing things. It's a beautiful, simplified rendition of something vintage, but with modern engineering underneath. I only wish they would do this with other things. The world could be a much more beautiful place. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!